I hope everyone is doing well. Good to see you guys again. So, welcome back to my workshop, How to Memorize Music with Intentionality. So, last time we looked at how grouping helps us to memorize music and how our brain organizes music into phrases, sections, and larger musical structures. So, today we'll look at how our brains also group music by rhythm and chord structures to better organize and solidify the music in our memory. So we're going to do some exercises that encourage these groupings. Rhythms are often the most identifiable characteristics of musical patterns. Therefore, it's really important that the rhythmic groupings are really clear in our mind. And if the rhythm is not clearly grouped, then it's going to be really hard to group any other patterns in the music. So one way we can clarify rhythmic groupings is by pausing on each beat, like this in this exercise. So as you do this, it's important to look at your hands so you can also visualize as you pause on each beat. And also important to make sure that you're using the right fingerings, because changing the rhythm like this will make the fingerings feel unfamiliar and then test your solidity with them. So if I were to play this, I would make sure that I guess I can't see everyone from here, but I would make sure that I'm looking at the keyboard. And then next, you can also challenge yourself by pausing on various notes within the beat, such as playing long, short rhythms, which I think you guys all are familiar with. And then after that, you can do short, long rhythms. And then after that, you can make it even harder by pausing on only the second small note in each beat. So it helps to count out loud while you do this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, Then after that, then just the third note. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 4, 1. And then the fourth beat, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, And then so forth, depending on how many small notes that you have in each beat. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to look for a phrase in your memorized piece where it feels like you have just a string of notes. And then you can try grouping these exercises from memory. So remember that as you do this, that if you play it slower, it will actually make it harder. And then, if possible, see if you could play with the phrasing that you want as well. is everybody's piece already memorized? So as you do this, try to look at your hands. And even if it feels hard and you're not sure which note it is, see if you can just, in the process of trying, that will really help. So don't look at your score. See if you can close your score and then just try this from memory.
I'm sorry.
Oh, yes. Oh, is that you? No, that's the other. Actually, this is kind of scary, right? Yeah, all the third. Okay, so hopefully that was enough time to kind of get a taste for it, and then you can keep working on that in your practice if you want. So let's keep moving. So we can also group by hand positions and chord structures. So to clarify the hand position groupings in our mind, we can pause on each new hand position. And then in other types of passages, we can also group broken harmonies into block chords. So this will condense the amount of information our brain has to process from individual notes into single chord units. So instead of playing everything separate like you normally would, then you could group them. And then, just like the other exercises, you want to make sure you're looking at your hands so you can also visualize those groupings. So I'll give you a few more minutes, and you can find another passage in your music where there's broken harmonies, and then practice these two exercises. And if you have trouble finding one, then you can let me know. Okay, so let's keep moving. So in addition to grouping music, we can also help our brain memorize better through exercises that make recalling the information more challenging and then force our brain to reconstruct its pathway for retrieval. So retrieval or reconstruction from memory creates stronger neural pathways. Oops. So every time you work hard to recall a memory, you actually strengthen it. The effort of retrieving knowledge or skills strengthens its staying power and your ability to recall it in the future. So when the brain has to work harder to retrieve information, it digs deeper into the brain to find the correct pathway, which paves the path more stably. We're easily seduced into believing that learning is better when it's easier, but the research shows the opposite. When the mind has to work, learning sticks better. For example, would you rather read an article that has normal type or type that's somewhat out of focus? Almost surely you would opt for the former. Yet when text on a page is slightly out of focus or presented in a font that's a little difficult to decipher, people recall the content better. In another surprise, when letters are omitted from words in a text, requiring the reader to supply them, reading is slowed and retention improves. In all of these examples, the change from normal presentation introduces a difficulty, a disruption of fluency, that makes the learner work harder to construct an interpretation that makes sense. The added effort increases comprehension and learning. Even how we schedule practice times can encourage effortful retrieval. So studies show that spaced out practice is much more effective than mass practice because forgetting some things in between sessions forces you to make a greater effort in recalling that information later. This added effort in retrieval helps encode the brain's pathway to that information more deeply. So the more effort required to retrieve or in effect relearn something, the better you learn it. In other words, the more you've forgotten about a topic, the more effective relearning will be in shaping your permanent knowledge. For example, if you have 14 hours to practice every week, and then you decide to cram those hours into 2 days, you'll feel good about your practicing because in the practice session, everything will stay fresh in your memory. Whereas putting the hours spaced throughout the week, it's going to feel more difficult because material will be harder to recall at the start of each session. However, it's because of this increased difficulty that makes spaced out practice more effective for memory in the long run. Mass practice gives us the warm sensation of mastery because we're looping information through short-term memory without having to reconstruct the learning from long-term memory. But the fluency gained through mass practice is transitory, and our sense of mastery is illusory. It's the effortful process of reconstructing the knowledge that triggers reconciliation and deeper learning. And this same concept applies to how we space out pieces in our practice. For example, practicing 3 days of a Bach piece and then 3 days of a Chopin piece is actually less effective than interspersing both pieces over the course of 6 days. Because practicing every other day, it's going to make recalling the information more challenging and then more effective to memory in the long run. We can also encourage effortful retrieval by doing retrieval exercises that challenge and strengthen our brain's pathway for recollection. So when we play music from memory, we rely most on 3 of our senses: on the feel or the muscle memory, on the hearing, and on sight. So by taking away or changing the feel, sound, or sight, our brain is forced to reconstruct the music based on different senses. And in that process, it tests what our brain can and cannot retrieve from memory. And from my experience, memory slips happen the most often when a performer relies on their muscle memory. So by changing how a piece feels or removing the feel entirely, the memory for how a piece sounds and looks on the keyboard is put to the test. And in fact, both hearing and seeing, they're both phenomenons that take place in the brain to begin with. Sound waves impinge on the eardrums and pinnae, which is the fleshy parts of your ear, setting off a chain of mechanical and neurochemical events, the end product of which is an internal mental image we call pitch. If a tree falls in a forest and no one is there to hear it, does it make a sound? Simply no. Sound is a mental image created by the brain in response to vibrating molecules. And for our sight, light waves are characterized by different frequencies of oscillation, and when they impinge on the retina of an observer, they set off a chain of neurochemical events, the end product of which is an internal mental image that we call color. So being able to hear and see a piece of music on the keyboard, it's an internal mental image. So our goal with retrieval exercises is to reconstruct and strengthen this image in our mind. So these retrieval exercises, they'll change or partially remove the feel, sound, and sight that you're used to when you just play automatically in autopilot. So this will force your brain to audiate and visualize in order to reconstruct it. And it's going to test what you can and what you cannot retrieve from memory, and then highlight places where you're uncertain. Then as gaps in your memory are reinforced, your mental image of the piece will be strengthened. So the first exercise is to play at half tempo or slower while analyzing patterns, harmonies, and fingerings. Next, you can play while keeping your eyes on only one hand the whole time. Then play again while keeping your eyes on only the other hand. So by doing this, you're disrupting what you usually look at when you're playing in autopilot. And often when we perform, our nerves cause us to look at the keyboard differently than how we do when we're just practicing normally. So it's important to be able to visualize both hands. So for example, if I'm just taking a passage, first I would look just at my right hand the whole time, then I'll just play it again and look at my left hand. And it will feel different based on which hand I'm looking at. So next, close your eyes and play as slowly as you need in order to visualize every note you're playing on the keyboard. And this exercise requires discipline because only you know if you're unable to visualize some of the notes or not. And it's really easy to just play on autopilot based on the feel. So remember that the goal with all of these is to make mistakes and then build solidity by fixing them. So disrupt playing in autopilot by going really slowly, and then challenge yourself to think through everything as you do this. And this next step is optional, and it's particularly helpful for dense counterpoint sections like fugues. So for dense counterpoint sections, cross your arms so your left hand plays an octave or two higher, while your right hand plays an octave or two lower, so that your hands are literally crossed like this. And this will force you to visualize, feel, and hear things differently, and then test how well you know the notes, harmonies, and fingerings. So I would play right hand down, left hand up. And then for the fifth step, play only one hand on the keyboard while the other plays with correct fingerings on your lap, while looking at the keyboard to visualize and audiate the notes of the hand playing on your lap, and then switch hands. So the point of this exercise is to recognize where you're unable to visualize or audiate, and then strengthen it. So go slowly and challenge yourself to find where the gaps are in your memory. And then when you're unable to visualize or audiate certain notes, you can play an autopilot to remind yourself, and then try again. But as much as possible, keep your scores close. See if you could find the answer in your brain first. So with this one, I would just be playing one hand, and my other hand is going to play on my lap. But as I play, I'm not going to look at the hand that I'm playing on the keyboard. I'm going to look at the notes that my hand playing on my lap would be playing instead. So I'm looking at my left hand notes on the keyboard, going to play my right hand on my lap, and then my eyes are going to be looking at where my right hand would be playing to see if I can visualize the notes. Does that make sense? Okay, so and then if that exercise is too challenging at first, you could ghost the notes instead of playing on your lap first, and then try the exercise again. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to choose one phrase that's difficult for you in your memorized piece, and then you can practice these exercises from memory with your scores, with not looking at your scores. So remember, just choose one phrase and then see if you could go through all the steps. And sometimes it can be hard to play slowly in the first step, so you could use a metronome to force yourself to slow down more. And just remember, for all the exercises, the slower you can go, the more effective it will be, because it will put you out of just playing in autopilot if you go slower than you're used to. 4, 5. Okay. So I will give you maybe like 3 more minutes, and then after that, I'm going to actually have you guys pair, and you're going to test each other to see if you can add your hand playing on your lap at a random time that the partner will ask you to. So if in 3 more minutes, see if you could get just one phrase with exercise 5. Okay, so let's go ahead and we're going to go ahead and test yourself with a partner. And it's okay if you don't feel quite comfortable with it yet because we didn't have a lot of time to go through all these steps. But now I'm going to pair your keyboards together so you can hear each other. So you're going to randomly ask your partner to add the hand playing on their lap to the keyboard at a random time. Does that make sense? So you're going to be able to hear them play one hand, and then you're going to tell them, okay, now add the other hand at a random point and see if they could actually do it. And if you're visualizing it correctly, you should be able to. So let's see. Okay. And then make sure you play slow enough so that there's time for the other person to actually tell you when. Because a phrase is pretty short, so go slow enough. So I think, yeah, you two are paired, you two, and your keyboards, and then your keyboard. Yeah. And then yours, I think it's with this one, yeah. And then you two, yeah. So for you, maybe you could just test yourself. You can see if you could just randomly add have yourself as your hand. The point of it really is just so that if you do this with your students, then because it's hard to tell if they're actually doing these exercises. So then in the lesson, you could have them randomly add the hand that they're trying to visualize on their lap as kind of a test to see if they could do it. Okay, so we'll just keep moving for now. So after we've done exercises that alter the feel, sound, and look of a phrase, now we want to completely eliminate those senses to force us to fully reconstruct how the piece feels, sounds, and looks in our minds. So for this exercise, I want you to play on your lap with correct fingerings while using the pedal, And again, looking at the keyboard to visualize and audio all that you're playing. So this is the same as the last exercise, but now just with both hands playing on your lap. So go as slowly as you need to thoroughly imagine everything and hear both the melody and the harmony in your head. And we can often imagine a better sound than we can actually play. So try to enjoy that as you're doing this exercise. And then when you're unable to recall something, like the notes, fingering, or any details, then again, you can play the passage in autopilot to find the answer and then test yourself again. So I'll give you another few minutes to do this exercise with the same passage that you've been working on. And then remember that you want to find mistakes so you can fix them and build solidity. So go slowly, and it's a good thing when you can find gaps in your memory. So the keyboard should actually be open for this one because you want to see if you could visualize the notes on the keyboard. Okay, so we're going to keep moving because we don't have a lot of time, but hopefully that gave you a feel for what these exercises are like. And we didn't have a lot of time, so if it felt really difficult and you weren't able to like feel good about it yet, that's actually a really good thing because that means you were doing it right and finding those places where you had gaps in your memory. Okay, so we'll skip this testing part. So after that first exercise feels comfortable, you can make things even more difficult by removing the image of the keyboard. So you can close your eyes and then play on top of the piano lid so that you can't even see the keyboard. And then while using the pedal and visualizing and auditorizing all that you're playing. Then for an even greater challenge, you can step away from the piano and close your eyes and see, can you visualize every note on the keyboard as you play the piece mentally? So then we're taking away even just the feel of playing on our lap and seeing the keyboard. And it's just completely in your brain. And then once you mastered this, you can practice anywhere. You could practice while you're on the bus or waiting in line or listening to me talk, or if you're lying in bed when you can't sleep. And it's kind of like having a portable instrument in your brain. So it's important to remember that all of these memorization exercises require time. So in fact, if you do them too close before a performance for the first time, you might really scare yourself with how many gaps are in your memory. So it's important to do these exercises over the course of many weeks before a performance. And lastly, I just want to leave you with 3 memorization tips. So number 1, practice performing. You never know how your body is going to react when under pressure. So memorizing a piece solidly is just one step of the process, while being able to focus well for a performance is a skill that also needs to be practiced. And number 2, take naps. Naps are scientifically proven to improve memory. They strengthen the connections formed during practice and prepare the brain for the next session. You need sleep before learning to prepare your brain like a dry sponge to absorb new information. And number 3, practice like it's your heart's desire. Or if it isn't, then at least pretend like it is. Memory strength is also a function of how much we care about the experience. Neurochemical tags associated with memories mark them for importance, and we tend to code as important things that carry with them a lot of emotion. So if we care about the music we're learning and associate it with deep interest, it's going to stand out more in our memory. So in a screen-centered society, we have images and voices forced on our imagination all day long. But in the process of making music, our imagination is given sovereignty. So I hope these ideas, they'll help you and your students to memorize more effectively and reach new levels of imaginative freedom in your playing. So thank you so much for coming to my workshop.